I have buried 3 men, 2 good horses, and 1 marriage of my own out here on the high benchland, and I never once let myself weep over a single one of them. A man learns to keep his water in him through a winter like ours. Tears freeze on the lashes and do nothing but hurt. So understand me when I say I am not the sort to tell a soft story. But I am going to tell you about the night Amos Kettleman's dog came scratching at the bunkhouse door with ice froze hard into his whiskers, and a sound in his throat I had never heard from any animal before. Half a whine, half a command. I am going to tell you about what that dog found out there in the dark, lying in the lee of the broken fence where the drifts pile shoulder deep. And I am going to tell you what we learned about her, the woman in the snow, 3 weeks later when the truth finally sat itself down at our table and asked, plain as day, for more coffee. Because here is the thing nobody tells you. A man can fall in love with a hand he has never held. He can give his whole heart to a string of words and a face in a photograph, and never once suspect that the 2 things might not belong to the same person. And when the truth of it finally comes, when it walks in out of the storm half dead and wearing somebody else's name, it does not always set him free. Sometimes it just breaks him open and waits to see what was inside all along. I have had a long time to think on it. I am thinking on it still. Let me start where it started, which is to say with the dog. His name was Boone, and he was the ugliest, most loyal creature God ever bothered to assemble. Part shepherd, part something with a square head and a barrel chest, the color of mud after a thaw. Amos had pulled him out of a flooding ditch as a pup 3 winters back, half drowned and squalling, and from that day forward the animal had decided his entire purpose on this earth was to keep Amos Kettleman within sight of him at all times. He slept across the man's threshold. He followed him to the privy. When Amos rode out to check the stock, Boone ran alongside the horse till his tongue dragged, and if you tried to shut him in the barn, he would howl loud enough to crack the window glass. I used to tell Amos that dog loved him more than any wife ever would. I meant it as a joke. I keep a little tally book in my coat, names of the calves, weather, what we paid for nails, and I have a habit of saying out loud the dry sort of things other men only think. It is a flaw. My own wife told me so, the day she packed her trunk and got on the southbound stage and did not look back, and I have not improved since. That joke about the dog stopped being funny in October, when Amos got the photograph. He had ordered himself a bride. I want to set that down without judgment, because it is the easiest thing in the world to sneer at a man who sends away to a catalog the same as he might for a new plow blade. But you have not stood inside the silence of this place in February. You have not watched a strong man go quiet for so many years that he forgets how his own voice sounds and starts talking to the stove. Amos was past 40. His people were dead. The nearest woman of marrying age was the widow Halloran, who was 60 if she was a day and meaner than a cornered badger. So when a fellow in St. Paul started up a little business matching lonesome Western men with women back east who had run short on prospects, Amos paid his $2 and wrote his letter and put it in the bag that went out on the freight wagon, and then he waited. The first answer came in the spring. The handwriting on it was fine and small, the letters all leaning forward like they were eager to get where they were going. Dear Mr. Kettleman. He read it to me by the fire, his ears red, pretending it was nothing. I am told you keep cattle and that the country is beautiful and hard. I do not mind hard. I have had hard. Tell me what the light does in the evening there. I want to know if it is the kind of place a person could be happy, or only the kind of place a person could survive. I remember that line because Amos read it 4 times. The kind of place a person could be happy, or only the kind of place a person could survive. He looked at me afterward like the woman had reached clean across 2,000 miles and put her finger on the one bruise he had been hiding his whole life. She writes like she can see the place, he said, like she's already standing in the yard. Her name was Clara. They wrote all through that year. I want you to know how rare that was. Most of these arrangements were settled in 3 letters and a one-way ticket, all business. A woman trading her youth for a roof and a man trading his loneliness for someone to mend his socks. But Amos and Clara wrote for 10 months. Long letters, some of them 8 pages. I never read them, that was his business, but I watched what they did to him. He started whistling. He fixed the sag in the porch that had been there since I came on. One evening I caught him out by the corral actually practicing, how he might say her name out loud when she stepped down off the stage. Clara, Clara, Miss Clara, trying out the soft and the formal of it like a boy trying on his father's hat. Then in October the photograph came. I have to tell you about the photograph, because it matters more than I knew at the time. It showed a woman maybe 30 years of age, seated in a photographer's chair against a painted backdrop of a garden. She was handsome in the strong, plain way of a woman who has worked. Dark hair pulled back severe, a wide jaw, a steady mouth, eyes that looked straight into the lens without any of the shy ducking most folks do. Across the bottom in that same forward-leaning hand was written, "Yours, Clara, so you will know me at the depot." Amos kept that photograph in his breast pocket against his heart like a fool and an honest man, which are frequently the same creature. He showed it to me. He showed it to the men at the feed store. He showed it, I am fairly certain, to Boone, who sniffed it politely and went back to sleep. The ticket was sent. The date was set. Clara would come west on the last freight run before the snows closed the pass for good, arriving the 3rd week of November. She did not come. The freight wagon came through on schedule, the driver stamping and cursing the cold, and there was no woman on it. There was no letter either, which was worse, because in all that year a letter had never once failed. Amos stood in the road in front of the depot with his good coat on and his hair slicked down with bare grease and the photograph in his pocket, and he watched the wagon roll away empty, and he did not say one word the whole ride home. I have seen men take bad news. I have watched a fellow get word his whole family burned in a house fire and just nod, slow, and ask if anyone wanted coffee. Grief out here does not always look like grief. It looks like a man going very still and very polite, like he is afraid that if he moves too sudden something inside him will come loose and never go back. That was Amos for the next 10 days. Polite, still. He did his work. He fed the stock. At night he sat by the fire with the photograph in his hand and turned it over and over, and the only sound in the house was the stove ticking and the wind finding the gaps in the chinking, and Boone lying across his feet with his big sad head on his paws, watching him the way the dog always watched him, like he was trying to take the hurt into himself if only somebody would show him how. On the 11th night, the storm came down off the divide. I have lived in this country 22 years, and I will tell you there is weather, and then there is the other thing, the thing that comes maybe twice in a generation, that the old Crow people had a word for that I never learned but that I understood the meaning of the first time I felt it. The temperature had been dropping all afternoon, the sky the color of a fresh bruise, and around supper time the wind shifted around to the north and stood up on its hind legs and began to scream. Snow came with it, not falling so much as flying, sideways, fine as flour, the kind that gets into a man's lungs and freezes him from the inside. You could not see the barn from the house. You could not see your own hand at the end of your arm. The world simply ceased to exist past a distance of about 4 feet, and inside that 4 feet it was so cold that the spit froze on your teeth. We battened down. Amos and me both. We got the stock into the barn and the door barred, and then we ran a rope from the barn to the house so a man could find his way back if he had to go out, and we built the fire up high and we sat. There was nothing else to do. You do not fight a storm like that. You wait it out and you pray if you are the praying kind. And you count your blessings if you have any left to count. It was full dark, near to midnight, when Boone began to act strange. He had been lying in his usual spot by the door. Now he got up. He went to the window and put his paws on the sill and stared out into the white nothing, and the hackles came up all along his spine, and he made that sound, that low rolling sound, half a question. Amos told him to lie down. The dog would not lie down. He went to the door and scratched at it and looked back at Amos and scratched again. And when Amos got up to settle him, the dog did something he had never done in 3 years. He barked, sharp and hard, right in the man's face, and then threw himself bodily against the door. "Something's at the stock," Amos said. He was already reaching for his coat. "A cat, maybe, or wolves." "In this," I said. "Nothing's out in this, Amos, nothing alive." But Boone was frantic now, spinning and lunging, and Amos got the door open just a crack and the dog shot through it like he was fired from a gun and vanished into the white, and Amos cursed and went after him, and so help me, fool that I am, I went after them both. You cannot understand the cold unless you have been in it. It is not a thing you feel. It is a thing that decides about you. Inside of 30 seconds my face had gone, just gone, no feeling in it at all, and the wind took the breath right out of my mouth before I could use it. We held to the rope and we called the dog's name and got nothing back but the scream of the wind, and I had it in my head, clear as a printed word, that we were both about to die out here chasing a dog after a coyote, and that they would find us in the spring thaw curled up like a couple of frozen calves. And I thought, well, that is a stupid way to go, but I have seen stupider. Then we heard Boone. He was barking off to the west beyond the end of the rope, out past the broken stretch of fence where the drifts always pile up worst. Steady barking. The kind a dog does when he has found a thing and means for you to come to it. Amos let go of the rope. "Amos, no," I had him by the sleeve. "You let go that rope, you're a dead man, you hear me." He looked at me. I could just make out his face in the snowlight, that strange gray glow a blizzard throws even in the dead of night. And he said, "He's never lied to me, not once in his life." And he pulled his arm free and walked into the white toward the sound of his dog, and there was nothing for me to do but tie the end of the rope to my belt and pay it out behind us and follow, and pray it was long enough. It nearly wasn't. We found Boone at the fence line at the very end of where the rope would reach, standing over a drift, and he had been digging. His paws were torn and bleeding from it, and he was still going, throwing snow up behind him in great heaving scoops and barking between, and at first I could not make out what he had found. It looked like a fallen branch, a bundle of rags, something the storm had carried and dropped. Then Amos went down on his knees in the drift and brushed the snow away with both his hands, and I saw the curve of a shoulder, the dark fall of frozen hair, a face gone the blue-white of skim milk, eyes shut, lips parted, and a thin breath. I swear to you I saw it, the faintest thread of steam, no wider than a thread, rising up off those parted lips into the killing air. A woman, out here in this, more than a mile from any road, with no horse, no wagon, no track behind her that the snow had not already swallowed. A woman lying down to die in the lee of Amos Kettleman's broken fence on the worst night of the worst storm in 20 years. "She's alive," Amos said. His voice cracked clean in half on the second word. "Reese, she's breathing, help me." I have wondered since how she came to be there. We never did learn the whole of it, she could not say in the end, and what she could say only made the rest of it stranger. But I will get to that. For now there was only the work of it. The two of us hauling a half-frozen woman up out of a snowdrift, her body gone stiff and heavy and terribly light all at once, and Amos getting her up over his shoulder and turning back into the wind with her, following the rope hand over hand, and me behind with the dog Boone limping now on his torn-up paws, but pressing close against the woman's dangling hand the whole way back, like even now he would not let her out of his sight. We got her inside. We got the door barred against the storm, and in the yellow light of the lamp, with the snow melting off her into a dark pool on the floorboards, and Amos chafing her frozen hands between his own and weeping openly, not caring that I saw, we got our first real look at the woman the dog had found. And I felt the floor go out from under me. Because I had seen that face before. Amos had shown it to me a dozen times, had shown it to half the county, had carried it against his heart for 2 months and worn the corners soft with his thumb. It was her, it was the woman in the photograph. It was Clara. And here is where the cold thing first crept up the back of my neck, where the very first wrongness of it first whispered to me, though I could not yet have told you why it was almost her. The same dark hair, the same wide, strong jaw, the same straight, steady set to the brow, even unconscious, even half dead, close enough that any man would have sworn to it in court. Close enough that Amos, sobbing her name over and over into her frozen hair, Clara, Clara, you came. You came after all, did not doubt it for a single instant. But I am a man who notices things. I keep a tally book. I count the calves and I write down the weather, and I have a curse on me of seeing the small wrong details that other folks slide right past. And as I knelt there in the lamplight helping wrap a stranger in blankets, I was looking at her face beside the memory of that photograph, and a quiet voice in the back of my skull was saying, "The eyes are wrong. The woman in the picture had eyes that looked straight into you. This one's lashes are too dark, the brows too fine. This is the same well, but it is not the same water." She was younger. That was the thing my eye had caught and my mind had not yet named. The woman in the photograph was a woman who had worked and aged and gone hard around the mouth. The woman on our floor, for all her suffering, was younger than that by 10 years at least. I did not say anything. What was there to say? A man had just had his prayer answered out of a snowdrift in the worst storm of his life. You do not lean over and tell him the miracle might have read the small print wrong. I held my tongue. I built up the fire. And I watched Amos Kettleman cradle a near-frozen stranger he believed with his whole heart to be his bride, and I had the cold, sure feeling, deep in my gut where the truth lives before the mind will let it up, that whoever this woman was, and however she had come to be lying in our snow, she was not Clara. And somewhere south of us, under another drift or in a pauper's grave, or simply gone from this world altogether, the real one was waiting to be explained. It would be 3 weeks before any of us learned how right and how wrong I was about every part of that. She did not stir until morning. She came back to the living slow, the way a fire catches in wet wood long stretches of nothing, then a sudden crackle, then nothing again. The first day she did not wake at all. We did what we knew. We kept her wrapped, kept the fire fed, and Amos sat by the cot we had dragged in beside the stove and held a tin cup of broth to her lips, a spoonful at a time, most of it running back down her chin, and talked to her low and steady through the whole long day. He told her about the cattle. He told her about the country and what the light did in the evenings, the same thing she had asked him about in that very first letter, a year ago and 2,000 miles away. He told her she was safe. He told her the storm could not get her now. I do not think she heard a word of it, but Boone heard. The dog had not left her side since we carried her in, and every time Amos's voice would crack, the big square head would lift off the floor and the brown eyes would find his face, checking on him, the way that animal had checked on him every day of his life. The storm blew itself out by the second evening. By then her color had come back from milk blue to something near living, and the frostbite, which we had feared would cost her fingers, had only blackened the very tips of 2 of them and would heal. She had been close, closer than I have ever seen a person come and walk back from. Another hour in that drift and Boone's nose would have found nothing but a body. She woke on the 3rd morning. I was at the table doing my figures. Amos had stepped out to the barn. And I heard a small sound from the cot, a kind of caught breath, and I turned and her eyes were open and fixed on the ceiling beams, and then they slid sideways and found me, and I watched her come up out of the deep of it into the terror of not knowing where she was, the muscles of her face going tight and her breath going short. "Easy," I said. I did not get up. A scared animal does not want you looming over it, and that is what she was just then, a scared half-wild thing waking in a strange den. "Easy now, you're inside, you're warm, you've been 3 days getting here and you're going to be all right." I kept my voice flat as the prairie. "My name's Reese, you're at the Kettleman place. You came near to dying in our snow and a dog dug you out of it, and I expect that dog's going to be insufferable about it for the rest of his natural life." Something moved across her face, not a smile, but the start of the idea of one quickly put away. She wet her cracked lips and she said, in a voice that had no more strength in it than a moth against a window, "A dog." "That one." I nodded at Boone, who had risen and put his chin on the edge of the cot and was regarding her with grave brown attention. "His name's Boone. He's the reason you're breathing." She looked at the dog for a long moment, and then she did a thing I have never forgotten. She worked one hand free of the blankets, the hand with the two black fingertips, and she laid it, trembling, on the broad, flat plate of Boone's skull, and the dog closed his eyes and leaned into it, and 2 tears ran sideways out of the corners of her eyes and down into her hair, and she did not make a sound. That was when Amos came in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway with the cold rolling in around his boots. The light fell across her face, and he said her name like it was the only word he had left in the whole world. "Clara." I watched her. This is the part I have gone over 1,000 times since, lying awake. I watched her hear that name, and I saw her flinch just barely, just a tightening around the eyes, and I saw her gather herself, the way you brace before you lift a thing heavier than you are, and I saw her make a decision in the space of a single breath. And then she turned her face toward him and she said, soft, "You're him. You're Amos." She did not say yes. I marked that even then, sitting at my table with my pencil gone still in my hand. She did not say, "Yes, I am Clara." She said, "You're him." She answered a question he had not asked to keep from answering the one he had. I did not understand it, but I felt the wrongness of it move through the warm room like a draft, and I bent back over my figures and said nothing, because it was not mine to say. Amos crossed the room and went down on his knees by the cot and took her good hand in both of his, and he was crying again, this great hard man who I had never once seen weep before that week, and he was saying, "You came. The wagon came empty and there was no letter, and I thought you changed your mind. I thought you were dead, I thought." And she let him hold her hand and she watched his face while he said it with an expression I could not name. It was not love, not yet. It was something closer to grief. It was the look of a person standing at a graveside that is not the one anyone thinks it is. She told us a story over the next few days in pieces as her strength came back. It hung together. It was, I would learn, mostly true, which is the most dangerous kind of lie there is. She had come west on the freight, she said, on the run before the one she was expected. There had been a mix-up with the dates, a delay, a missed connection in Cheyenne. The driver, not finding anyone to meet her, had let her off at a road ranch 15 miles south, saying the Kettleman place was an easy half-day's ride and surely someone would carry her the rest of the way. No one had. The storm had come on faster than anyone reckoned. She had set out walking, foolish, she knew, but she had been afraid of being snowed in a month at a stranger's road ranch with men she did not know and no chaperone, more afraid of that than of the weather, and the white had come down and swallowed the world and the road with it, and she had walked until she could not walk, and then she had crawled, and then she had crawled into the lee of a fence to rest a moment out of the wind, and she did not remember anything after that. It was a good story. It accounted for everything. The no letter, the empty wagon, the impossible fact of a woman alone in a blizzard a mile from the road. Amos drank it down like a man dying of thirst, and why would he not? Every word of it confirmed the answered prayer. Every word of it said she came for you. She nearly died coming for you. But I keep a tally book, and I had questions that did not go in any ledger. Such as, where was her trunk? A woman crosses a continent to be married, she brings a trunk. She brings her mother's quilt and her good dress and whatever small things she has carried out of her old life into the new. This woman had come to us with nothing. Nothing but the clothes froze to her body, which were good wool but plain and worn, and one thing besides, which I did not learn about until later and which changes everything, so I will hold it. Such as, a woman who has written 8-page letters for 10 months, who has poured out her whole soul onto paper to a man she means to marry. When that man kneels weeping at her bedside and pours his own soul back, ought she not, somewhere in there, to know the things she wrote? Amos would say, low and tender, "Do you remember when you told me about your sister, about the garden, about your mother's hands, and I watched her every time, and every time there was that half second of nothing behind her eyes, that scramble, that careful general answer that could have meant anything. Of course, I think of it often. She never once said a thing first. She only ever agreed. A person remembering their own life leads. This woman could only follow. I told myself it was the cold. The frost can scramble a person's wits for a time. I have seen it. I told myself she was weak and frightened and far from home, and that I was a sour old man looking for trouble in a happy thing, because I had never managed to hold on to any happiness of my own. I told myself that a good deal. It is amazing what a man can talk himself into when the alternative is breaking another man's heart. She grew stronger. By the second week she was up, moving careful around the house, and she began to do the small things a woman does, and here at least there was no false note. She could cook. She could mend. She set the place to rights in a quiet, competent way that made me understand, with a small ache I did not expect, how long it had been since this house had a woman in it. She was kind to Boone, fed him from her own plate when Amos was not looking, which was strictly against the rules and which the dog naturally adored her for. She was gentle with Amos in a careful, watchful way, like a woman handling something that had been broken once and badly mended. And she was easy with me, oddly. With Amos she was always performing, always one beat behind, always agreeing. With me, who asked her nothing and watched her too closely, she relaxed. Once when Amos had gone out and I made some dry remark about Boone's opinion of himself, she laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her, that lit her whole face. And for just that 1 second she was not following anyone. She was just a woman, young and quick and alive, in a warm room. Then she remembered herself, and the laugh closed up, and the wariness came back down over her like a lid. I knew by then. I think I had known since the third morning. I just did not have the shape of it. The morally heavy part, and there is always one, in any story worth the telling, came on a gray afternoon in the third week. Amos had ridden out to break ice on the stock tank, a 2-hour job in the cold, and the woman and I were alone in the house, and she was at the stove and I was at my table, and the only sound was the fire and Boone's tail thumping the floor in his sleep. And I set down my pencil and I said to her back, not unkindly, "How long do you mean to keep it up?" She went very still. The spoon stopped in the pot. "I don't know what you mean," she said. But she said it to the stove, not to me, and there was no fight in it. "I mean," I said, "that I've been 22 years in this country and I have learned to read men and weather and animals, and I am not entirely a fool about people either, whatever my failings. I mean that you flinch every time he says that name. I mean that you don't know the things she wrote, the things you'd surely know if you wrote them. I mean that you came to us with no trunk and no letter and a story that holds together a sight too neat. And I mean," and here I gentled my voice because her shoulders had begun to shake, "that you have a kindness in you that a liar doesn't have, and I have watched you tearing yourself in two for 3 weeks now over something, and I am too old and too tired to watch it any more without asking. So I'm asking, who are you?" She turned around, and the face she turned to me was not the careful, following face she wore for Amos. It was naked. It was a young woman drowning a second time, only slower and with her eyes open. "If I tell you," she said, "you'll make me leave, and it'll kill him. The leaving will kill him surer than the snow nearly killed me." She pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth. "I've watched him 3 weeks. I know what's in him. I read it for a year before I ever—" She stopped. Caught the word before it got out. But it was too late. I had it, and I think she saw that I had it, and something in her gave way, like a riverbank in a flood, all at once and without a sound. "I read it," she said again, quieter, "for a year, every word he ever sent." "And wrote back," I said. She nodded, one small nod. "Every word," she whispered, "every word that he loved, every word he carried in his pocket against his heart, I wrote them all." The fire popped. Boone lifted his head, looked between us, and lay back down. And I sat there with the bottom falling out of everything I thought I had figured, because I had been so proud of myself. She is not Clara, the eyes are wrong, The woman in the photograph is older. I had cracked one shell and been so pleased that I never thought to ask what was inside it. Then who, I said slowly, is Clara? The woman looked at me for a long moment. Outside, faint, I could hear the ring of Amos's axe on the tank ice, working his way back to us, 2 miles off and coming closer. Clara, she said, was my sister. And then, because the worst things are always said in the plainest words, Clara is dead. She's been dead since September. And the man chopping that ice out there fell in love with a woman who could not read or write one line of her own name. And he doesn't know it. And the photograph in his pocket is of a woman who's 3 months in the ground. And I am the one who let him do it, every day for 3 weeks, because I could not find the way to take it from him. She set down the spoon. She wiped her hands on her apron slow, like she was wiping away the whole last year. My name is Ada, she said, and I am not the woman he wrote to. I am only the one who wrote back. The axe ring stopped. Far off, through the one clear pane of the window, I could just make out the small dark shape of Amos turning his horse for home, with the gray light failing behind him and the cold coming down, riding back toward a house that he believed at last held everything he had prayed for. And I had perhaps an hour to decide what kind of man I was going to be when he walked through that door. Had an hour. I have measured out the rest of my life against the decisions I have made, and I will tell you there have not been many I would call hard. A man's choices out here are mostly between bad and worse, and you learn to take the bad one quick and not look back. But that hour, while Ada told me the rest of it and Amos rode the long cold miles home, was the hardest reckoning I have ever sat through, and I was only a bystander to the grief in it. She talked fast now that the dam was broke. It came out of her in a flood, and I let it, because I think she had been carrying it alone so long that the weight of it had near crushed the life out of her before the snow ever got the chance. Clara was the elder by 6 years. The beauty of the family, Ada said, without one drop of bitterness. She truly was. She had a way of standing in a room that made men forget their own names. But there had been a sickness when Clara was small, a fever that left her wits whole but her letters scrambled forever after. She could not read a printed page nor write more than her own name, and that one only by copying it like a drawn picture. In their part of the world, in their poverty, no one had thought it worth the trouble to teach a girl past that, and so Clara grew up handsome and capable and entirely shut out from the country of the written word. Ada was the opposite. Plain, she said, the plain one, that was understood about me the way it was understood that Clara was the beauty. It was just the shape of the family, but quick with letters from the first. And a schoolmaster's widow in the town had taken a shine to her, and taught her to read anything and write a fair, clean hand and love books the way other girls loved ribbons. So when their parents died, and the 2 sisters were left with nothing but each other and a mountain of debt, and Clara, ever the practical one, ever the one who looked the cold facts in the eye, decided that the surest way out for both of them was to answer one of those advertisements for Western brides. It was Ada who wrote the letters. It was only ever going to be a few. That was the plan. A man writes, you write back enough to settle the terms, he sends a ticket, Clara goes west and marries and sends for Ada once she is established, and the debt is paid and the 2 of them are saved. Cold arithmetic, Clara's specialty. Ada was only the pen. But Amos wrote back. You have to understand his letters, Ada said. She had sat down across the table from me now, and her hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, and Boone had come and put his head in her lap, and she stroked his ears while she talked without seeming to know she did it. Most of the men Clara had me write to 4 or 5 at the start, to see who'd answer best. Most of them wrote like they were buying stock. I have 80 acres. I require a woman of sound health and Christian habit. And then his came. She shook her head. He asked what I thought about at night. He asked if I had ever been happy and what it had felt like so he could know it when it came. He wrote 3 pages once about a horse he'd had as a boy that died, and how he'd never told a living soul how he cried over it, and he didn't know why he was telling me except that the dark out here is very large and a person wants to set something true into it before they lose the nerve. She looked up at me. I wrote back as Clara, but the words were mine. The horse, I told him about the dog I'd loved, only I called it Clara's dog. The thing about being happy, that was me, that was my whole heart, I just signed her name to it. And he wrote back like I'd handed him water in a desert. And I told myself it was for Clara, it was all for Clara, I was only helping. And every night I'd read his new letter by the candle after Clara was asleep, because she couldn't read it herself. She'd have me read it to her, and she'd nod and say, "He sounds a good steady man," and roll over and go to sleep, and I'd sit up till the candle drowned, reading it again. And again. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. I fell in love with a man my sister was going to marry, and I wrote him a year of love letters and signed them with her name, and I told myself the whole time that it was nothing, that it was only ink, that it would all come right when Clara went west and I came after and lived in the next room and grew old as the spinster aunt who taught his children their letters. I told myself that. God forgive me. I made my whole peace with that. And then she took sick, I said. In August, the same fever come back or its cousin. Ada's eyes had gone somewhere far off. It was quick, 6 weeks. By September she was so light at the end, Mr. Reese, I could lift her like a child, and she knew. Clara always knew the cold facts before anyone, and near the end she made me sit by her and she said, Ada stopped. Her mouth worked. She said, Ada, you're going to go in my place. And I said no, I said I'd never, and she got angry. She got the last of her strength up to be angry at me, and she said, don't be a fool your whole life. He doesn't love me. He never met me. He's never once heard my voice. He loves whoever's been writing him those letters, and that's not me. It's never been me. I can't even read them. She said, you go west and you tell him the truth or you don't. I leave that to you, but you go. Because the woman that man loves is already half dead in this bed, and it isn't me, it's you. And it would be a sin against God to let her die too. The room was very quiet. The fire had burned low. I did not get up to feed it. She made me write one last letter, Ada said. She couldn't, so she said it, and I wrote it, to him. And then she made me promise not to read it after, just to seal it and carry it and give it to him myself in his own house with my own hand. And then she died. Ada drew a long, shaking breath. I had the ticket. I had her photograph. Folks always said we favored each other. The same jaw, the same brow. Only she was the handsome one and I'm the young plain one. I came west. And the whole way I argued it back and forth, tell him, don't tell him, give him the letter at the door and let it do the telling, or just turn around in Cheyenne and disappear and let him grieve a Clara who at least never lied to him. She gave a sound that was not a laugh. And then the storm took the choice clean out of my hands, the way storms do, and I was crawling in the snow and I thought, well, here's the answer. I'll just die here and he'll never have to know any of it, and that's the kindest thing I ever did for anyone. And then a dog dug me out. She put both her hands on Boone's broad head and bent over him. And I woke up, she said into the dog's fur, and he said her name. And I was so weak and so frightened and so glad to be alive. God help me, I let him. I let him say it. And every day since I have meant to give him the letter, and every day I have looked at his face and not been able to take it from him. Because for 3 weeks I have had the thing I wanted for a year. I have lived in the house with him and watched him be kind and watched him love me thinking I'm her. And I knew it was a sin and a theft and I did it anyway. And I am so ashamed. And I would do it again. And I don't know what's wrong with me that both those things can be true at once. That was when I heard Boone's tail go still. The dog had lifted his head. And a half-second later I heard it too, boots on the frozen porch, and the latch. Amos came in out of the dark with the cold rolling off his coat and snow on his hat brim and his face raw red from the ride. And he was smiling, the open, uncomplicated smile of a man coming home to the best thing that ever happened to him. And he said, it's coming on to blow again. We'll want to. And he saw her face. He stopped, the smile went. He looked at Ada hunched over the dog with the tears running silent down her cheeks, and then he looked at me sitting still as a stone at the table, and a man does not have to be told that the world has shifted under him. He feels it in the floor. "What's happened?" he said, not a question, flat, bracing. The same stillness I had seen in him the day the empty wagon came, the politeness a man puts on over a wound. "Is she sick, Reese? What's happened?" And here was my hour come down to its single minute. And I will tell you what I did, because it is the one thing in this whole sorry business I am not ashamed of. I said nothing. I stood up and I called the dog Boone, come, and Boone came, reluctant, looking back, and I took my coat off the peg and I said, "I'll be in the barn." And I left them, because it was not my truth to tell and it was not my heart to break, and a man's reckoning with the great loss and the great gift of his life is a thing he is owed in private. I went out into the cold and I shut the door, and Boone and I stood in the lee of the barn while the wind came up again off the divide, and I did not hear what was said in that house, and I have never asked. I can only tell you what I saw when I finally came back in, near 2 hours later, half froze, because a man cannot stand in a Montana barn all night for the sake of someone's privacy. She had given him the letter. It was open on the table, the single sheet of it in her hand, in Ada's hand, the same fine forward-leaning hand he had loved for a year, the hand he had thought was Clara's. He must have known it the moment he saw the writing. The writing was the proof and the confession and the whole truth all at once. The hand that wrote yours, Clara, at the bottom of every letter was the same hand sitting weeping across his own table. Amos was holding the photograph, the one from his breast pocket. He was holding it in one hand and the letter in the other, and looking from one to the other, the dead sister's face and the living sister's words, and his own face. I do not have the words for his face. I have tried for years. The closest I can come is this. He looked like a man who has been handed back something he buried, and told that it was never the thing he thought he buried in the first place. He looked like grief and wonder had got into the same harness and could not agree which way to pull. When he spoke, it was not to her and not to me. It was to the room, or to God, or to the dead woman in the photograph. "A whole year," he said, very low. "Every word every word I loved." He stopped. He set the photograph down on the table, gentle, face up, the strong, handsome stranger he had carried against his heart for 2 months and never once met. And he looked at Ada, the plain one, the young one, the one who had been in the room with him the whole time, in every letter, behind every word, hidden inside her sister's name like a kernel inside a shell. "It was you," he said, "the whole time, everything it was you." And he could not say any more. He had got to the end of his words. This man who had poured out his whole soul to her across 2,000 miles, who had practiced her name in the yard like a boy, who had 3 pages once about a dead horse he'd never told a living soul about. He sat there with the letter in his hand and the truth standing in front of him in the body of a woman he had pulled out of a snowdrift, and he could not make a single sound. Whatever was in him had risen up too large and too tangled to fit through the door of speech. She had left him speechless. Not the lie, the truth. The truth that the woman he had loved was real after all, had been real the whole time, was sitting right there, and was not and never had been the one whose name was on the letters. What was in the dead sister's last words I never learned the whole of. Ada told me only a little much later, on a different and warmer night, and I will not set down here the parts she kept. But I know it ended with Clara's blessing on the both of them, dictated from her deathbed in her cold, practical love, telling Amos not to grieve a woman he never knew, and not to let her foolish, proud sister run from the one good thing either of them had ever been handed. "He loves whoever wrote those letters," she'd said. She had seen the whole of it from the start, while the two of them blinded themselves. The dying often see clearest. They have nothing left to want, and so they can afford the truth. I will not tell you it was all made right that night, tied up neat with a bow. It was not. Things do not go like that, not out here, not anywhere I have lived. There was a long, hard winter still to get through, and a great deal that had to be unsaid and resaid between two people who had loved each other for a year through a dead woman's name and had to learn, slow and clumsy, and from the beginning, how to do it as themselves with their own two faces in the same small room. There was shame to be worked through, and grief for Clara, who deserved to be grieved as herself, and not only as a story the two of them had been telling. There were days that winter the house was so silent I took my supper to the barn. But I came down one gray morning near the end of February, the worst of it past, the light just beginning to come back longer in the evenings, the way Amos had once described it to her in a letter she wrote to herself without knowing it. And I found the two of them at the table. He was teaching her the brands. She was teaching him a word he had spelled wrong his whole life. Boone lay across both their feet at once, which a dog can only do if the two people are sitting very close together. And neither of them was performing for the other. He was not calling her by any name at all just then. He did not need to. He just reached over without looking and put his hand over her hand with the two black fingertips that the frost had taken, the hand that had written every word he ever loved, and she let him, and went on talking. I went back out and stood on the porch a minute in the cold, clean air before I let them know I was up. Boone heard me through the door and thumped his tail twice against the floor and did not get up, because, for the first time in his loyal, foolish life, there was something in that house he trusted to watch over the man as well as he could himself. I keep a tally book, as I have said. Names of calves, the weather, the price of nails. I am not a man given to soft conclusions, and I distrust them in others. So I will not tell you they lived happy, because I do not know the future and neither do you, and there is a great deal of winter left in any life. I will only tell you the last thing I wrote in that book about the whole affair, on the morning I am describing, before I opened the door and went into my coffee. I wrote the date and the temperature, and below it, because I am old and a fool, and my wife was right about me, I wrote,